There are times where you stumbled upon an album that was on your radar for quite some time, you end up listening to it and you wonder why you didn't listen to it much sooner. But then again, that first listen, that decision to give this a shot, might feel more appropriate than any other period of time. Welcome to the first Alpha-27 Essentials video, where I analyze some of the most important albums I've stumbled upon, and one of my favorite albums of all time has been the debut full-length album of Ayesha Erotica, Big Juicy. There is actually a huge history and discussion behind Ayesha Erotica, which I'm just going to cover briefly. There's already a lot of YouTube videos discussing the story behind Ayesha Erotica, which seems to have a lot of mysteries behind it. Ayesha Erotica is a trans woman emerging in the era of early SoundCloud and having quite a few works that some people could even describe as the very start of hyperpop, at least in terms of influence, attitude and aesthetics, rather than musical direction specifically. Big Juicy introduced an eclectic sound of Miami bass and Electroclash that for its time felt surprisingly refreshing, mostly due to its attitude with the lyrics and the way its themes are approached. At the same year we also got Barely Legal, which was a great continuation, and also a couple of EPs. But then is where things started getting a little bit weird. A ton of bootleg and unauthorized material started surfacing on the internet, and I remember some of them appearing on Spotify for a short period of time and then disappearing and replaced with other bootleg stuff. At the time I'm making this video, it seems that there are 3 albums available: Hollywood, Slut, and Where Is That Damn Baby. None of the 2 main albums are available, and I've seen this change multiple times. I've never seen this happen with any other Spotify artist page. So looking at all of this happen constantly, there is this mystery of what is going on behind this Spotify page. On top of that, there have been rumors and discussions about the whereabouts of Ayesha Erotica. After a doxing scandal and a series of constant harassment, she mostly disappeared out of the public eye and stopped making music. There were also multiple tracks and clips leaked, including some pretty controversial stuff, which one of them being an old song where she constantly says the N-word, and I say mostly disappeared because we saw her featured in some later singles, but apart from a couple of features here and there back in like 2018 and 2019, the whereabouts of Ayesha Erotica seem to be a mystery to this day. Recent posts showcase that at least she is alive and doing okay, but all of the mystery surrounding Ayesha Erotica is a non-stop ongoing thing, which showcases her massive influence in certain internet communities. Because for the most part you can say that Ayesha Erotica is being recognized as an underground and independent artist, not going that much beyond the status of an internet cultural phenomenon. And Big Juicy feels somewhat special, mainly because I get this feel that I'm living through an era that I haven't experienced beforehand, and that is the MySpace era. The emo particles, the independent feel, the trashy sounds, the party themes, all of them remind me of an era where I think that this project would be a part of. However, the year 2016, the one that Big Juicy came out, is not one that you associate with MySpace, since in 2016 MySpace has been considered pretty much dead. This would make Big Juicy feel like an album coming out at the wrong time, feeling dated. But weirdly enough, Big Juicy, not only did it feel like it came out at an appropriate time, but as the years go by, it seems like it's becoming more and more influential and more of like a cult classic. I think that is mainly because Big Juicy feels more of like a critique and poking fun of the era of MySpace culture rather than a full-on embracement. Now I was a little bit young for this 2000s era. I missed the time dominated by emo culture and scene girls, but I was old enough to witness the death of this era and all of the red flags that caused its death. An endorsement of a lifestyle of partying irresponsibly and getting wasted, romanticization of self-harm, and multiple allegations of sexual harassment and rape from musicians towards a large teenage emo fandom. And I also can't help but correlate all of this with the time period of late 2000s and early 2010s, where you would see figures like Shane Dawson and Onision dominate the YouTube scene, and we all saw where their insane power dynamics have led to. All of that might feel like an incoherent collection of information that I gathered, but I can't help but think of all of this stuff while listening to Ayesha Erotica. Big Juicy is a weird reflection of an era that I only caught up with towards its death, and its context might make you think otherwise, but this album is so on the nose and so raw with its depictions that it succeeds more on grossing you out rather than making you endorse a potentially destructive lifestyle. So what is Big Juicy? For me, it's one of the most explicit, hedonistic, and vulgar albums I think I've ever heard, and I kinda love it for that, with pop and hip hop being criticized in more recent years at least about the more explicit and over-sexualized content, as if this hasn't happened with mainstream artists for every single generation. Every single time it's like, this is when it's too far. You know, this was said about the previous generation of artists, and the previous one, and the previous one, but this is where it's too far. And this is most likely gonna be the discussion in the next generation as well. Big Juicy just knocks everything out of the park. Any one of the conservative figures who cried about the explicit nature of WAP would squeamish just by looking at the lyrics of any of the tracks out of Big Juicy. They wouldn't even repeat them. Not because they genuinely feel disgusted by the context, it's all a grift. They just have to keep a poker face, pandering to their audience, keeping their stance against the degeneracy that has plagued mainstream music. And this is probably why we never saw and will never see more mainstream status out of Ayesha Erotica. This album is so much in your face, so ridiculously explicit, it cannot apply to a broader audience, so it's not even that much worth being the new target of showcasing degenerate lifestyles. Big Juicy is really simple and specific with its themes. It's mostly about party, sex, and coke. Lots of coke. Some tracks focus on other, even more specific themes, but we're gonna talk about them later as we go along with the track listing. So let's start off with the very first track of this album, Coked Up. You can immediately tell what this track is all about, just by the title, and I love how it's not subtle about it in any way. You know exactly what you're getting into when it comes to the lyrics. It's about partying and having a good time with a lot of coke, but it's with the music where the things become really interesting. At first glance, there's nothing particularly special about the instrumental, and that's basically the case for the entirety of the first verse. Listening to it, it feels like a very basic approach of Miami bass, and there is this style that feels so much like the trashy 2000s era of pop and hip hop music. There is also a pretty monotone and somewhat robotic delivery that you would get from Electroclash, another genre that feels more like a 2000s throwback. It might sound like a lot, but it's really not as interesting as I make it out to be. The sound choices are pretty standard, the beat is very minimal, and there's a lot of empty space. You get this feeling that there could have been more in order to make the sound feel more rich. But then the chorus kicks in, and once again, its additional sounds don't really add much to the song in order to make it stand out all that much in comparison to the verse. But 8 beats afterwards, and when the post-chorus kicks in, this is where the entire mood of the song is completely changing. All of a sudden you get those loud, sinister, and buzzing synths that feel more of like they're coming out of an agrotech or EBM project. There is this sudden weird industrial feel to it, it's unexpected, and suddenly the whole track feels different. And that's only for a moment that lasts 8 bars and just a couple of seconds. Then you just get the same direction with the second verse, and then you get this hauntingly explosive post-chorus 2 more times throughout the song. And this small moment might feel like something minor, but for me, it changes everything. The whole album started to feel different. It made me rethink the whole mind process I had getting into this project, considering the vastly different first impressions that I got with listening to the first verse. The MySpace vibes started becoming more clear, but it stopped being just another mindless underground project. It became more of like a reflection of all the more sinister parts and trends of this era of music and culture. And this is a feeling reinforced even greater in my opinion as the tracklist goes on. The next track, Cocaine Superstar, is also, obviously, not all that subtle. And thematically it's not really all that different compared to Coked Up, as you can guess. Now, Cocaine Superstar might be my favorite moment out of this album, because as far as it is a really catchy song, it also got those sinister industrial sound choices that we saw from Coked Up, but this time you get an even more threatening aura from beginning to end. The build-up at the beginning is already dark, with his industrial synth slowly fading in, while a minimal kick is the only other thing contained in the instrumental at the moment. The verses feel more robotic, less energetic and passionate, but this feels like a positive with this particular song, because the very minimal beat and the amount of empty space actually contribute on creating a darker and more mysterious tone. It also helps that we get those glitchy parts with the vocals, which makes it feel like a malfunction, and after Coked Up, you know that this empty space is gonna get filled with some fucked up sounds at the chorus. You know that something big is coming. And this chorus is insane. It already starts with a type of sound that feels more out of like a horror movie. There is also a really nice touch with the vocals being extremely robotic with the use of glitch and pitch shifts. And once again, after 8 bars, another layer of synths is added, once again sinister, loud, and it's like listening to Miami bass with EBM type synths. It's like a fever dream. It's weirdly nightmarish. The bridge towards the end also gets kinda ridiculous with its vocal effect usage, but overall structurally it's pretty much the same with Coked Up. It just feels better in its execution in all fronts, but I'd say that's due to its more sinister attitude from the beginning. Coked Up feels better as an introduction to set things up though. The self-titled track comes up next, and this probably feels like the closest to this MySpace era aesthetic, with its somewhat quirky and more relevant at the time sound choices. This is also a track that I would consider one of the greatest moments in the album. It keeps lots of the elements that I liked about the previous 2 songs, and it's very catchy and energetic. Apparently, according to Genius, Big Juicy was a contestant on the TV show Wife Swap. Other than that, it feels mostly like another straightforward, nasty, overly sexual and hedonistic song, and it's pretty fine for what it is, with some varied vocal deliveries, glitchy parts and weirdly mixed moans. In this case, you don't even wait for 8 bars in order to pick up with its loud and dark synths. It's sudden and straight to your face. And once again, its contrast with the less melodic and more empty parts in the verses makes for a great experience. So far we have 3 spectacular tracks, although really similar one from each other. The next one, Cadillacs, slightly spices things up due to its more melodic attitude right from the get-go. Another really fun song when it comes to its instrumental, with what is probably the catchiest chorus out of this album. And this is the first time in the album where we don't see that much of a huge spike of changey vibes from the verses to the choruses. It keeps the mostly melodic pattern, just adding a very nice synth melody that greatly manages to elevate what is already a well put together song. Also, the variation of the vocal deliveries is what might make this my favorite chorus of this album. This is also one of the most interesting lyrically in my opinion. It takes this whole cocky attitude of a rich girl with high standards to the point where even a Cadillac is considered a poor man's car. It's old-fashioned and indication of no status, which is pretty insane to think about. Obviously it all boils down to sexual and hedonistic content, how she would feel uncomfortable fucking someone in a Cadillac or be shown with someone of such low status. There is even a line in the bridge where she says she would have gone too far to make him babies if his father didn't cut him off. Maybe I'm thinking of it too much, but for a trans woman who was 20 years old at the time to write this line is such a bold move. But speaking of really bold choices, next up we have the track 16, which I think was the first track I've ever heard from Ayesha Erotica, and it is somewhat shocking. Instrumentally, it's a shift in comparison to anything else in the album so far in terms of its overall structure and pacing. There is no sudden transition, the track keeps the same sounds for the verses and the choruses. Now thematically, it's actually what the title says, Ayesha being 16 and a 25-year-old man trying to have sex with her. As you can guess, it's not subtle about it. It's really bold, straightforward and pretty disturbing. This track feels like the strongest reflection of what I was mentioning beforehand, the very messed up situations associated with emo culture and 2000s internet and music circles, where a lot of pedophilic situations were taking place. In this song, the man seems to be unaware of the fact that Ayesha is underage, but still tries to take advantage of her and coerce her to have sex. In the chorus, the age is revealed, in which the ad-libs showcase a bewilderment from the man in that information. And even if the way she says you're gonna go to jail line might feel corny, it's got an attitude that creates even more character, making this whole situation more disturbing considering that while she has restraint and rejects his persuasive offers, she still acts immature with the way she talks and expresses herself, something that the guy was clearly trying to take advantage of, even with him pretending that he couldn't believe a person like this could be underage. I think it's a very well written song. Its simplicity is all it needs, it's direct and straight to the point in describing this messed up situation. The excellent instrumental also helps with its constant threatening aura and ominous tone. Make You Come is the very first moment in the album that I would consider weak. It's not a bad track, I think it's still pretty enjoyable, but in comparison to the rest of the album, this really wasn't all that impressive. Lyrically, it's another track that is heavily hedonistic, and at this point it doesn't really provide that much more. The shock value is somewhat missing, and it's also the most simplistic and the least imaginative when it comes to the chorus. It also lacks the intensity of the previous songs. The chorus is basically almost the same with the verses instrumentally, and so it feels somewhat lackluster. Also, the use of the air horn feels more of like a corny element from the trashy side of 2000s electronic and pop music rather than a twist on our perception of these aesthetics. Then there's the track Emo Boy, one of the more well-known Ayesha Erotica songs. This one is a banger, although the mixing feels a bit rough. It's an extremely energetic song. This one is filled with references of things related to emo culture, and this song touches hardcore upon these themes. It's another straightforward song in which Ayesha Erotica wants to be fucked by an emo boy. Interestingly enough, it feels like a reversal of roles, as Ayesha seems to be the one persuasive to have sex, rather than the other way around. I would consider this one of my personal favorites in the album, but it's still a great moment. There's a lot of character to it and a lot of energy. The final track of the album, Juicy Couture, is undoubtedly my least favorite moment in the album. I think that as a finisher, this album ends things in a pretty underwhelming tone. This feels like the direction I was actually worried this album might take before listening to it. The instrumental is fine, but feels kinda bland. It's of a more slow pace, and I also find the auto-tune vocals to feel slightly annoying and not really working all that well. Lyrically, it's also a track that doesn't feel all that special. It's at this point where its themes start becoming a bit redundant, not really adding a lot to this overly sexualized content, and it's not really all that imaginative. But even with two moments being not all that interesting, the rest of the album is fascinating. Thankfully, it's a pretty short project that doesn't overstay its welcome, though here lies one of my criticisms of the album, is that it works the way it does because it's this short. Maybe at this point there wasn't all that much room for adding more imaginative ideas, and it could become repetitive and one-dimensional, but there's still some variety when it comes to some of the structures in the second half of the album, and the track 16 and Emo Boy feeling slightly different in the way they approach their themes. In this short package, the album manages to pleasantly surprise me and shock me for how bold it is. It doesn't hold back on the details, and it's not afraid to go one step further. What in retrospect feels like a trashy project that came many years later than what it's supposed to, ends up feeling really refreshing, with its unsettling sound choices and the way it tackles its themes. The more intentional element is what makes the album stand out, and not feel like your average Miami bass or Electroclash project that came back from the surface after a MySpace deep dive. There is something unique about this project, making it feel relevant to this day, and the best way to reflect on the best/worst elements of a now forgotten and dead era of music and culture. But even if I'm possibly overthinking all of this, it works amazingly as a mindless fun project as well. It's heavily addictive, and I would personally consider this one of my personal favorite albums of all time, and for all of those reasons, I consider Big Juicy to be an essential. Leave a comment down below to let me know your thoughts on this album. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.